It was a cold evening outside a luxury bakery, the kind where people paid $50 for a slice of cake just to post it online. But on that same sidewalk sat a little black girl, no older than 8. Her clothes were torn, her eyes were tired. She didn't ask for money. She didn't even ask for help. She looked up and whispered to the man in the suit, "Sir, do you have any expired cake?" The man froze. The world around him stopped. Because in that one sentence, he saw everything wrong with the world. He didn't know then that question would change his life forever. Sometimes the smallest voices hold the biggest truths. Watch till the end. This story will break your heart and heal it too. The man's name was Richard Hale, a billionaire known across the city for his luxury, restaurants, and high-end food chains. He had everything people dream of: a glass penthouse overlooking the skyline, private chefs, expensive art, and a life polished to perfection. But somewhere between power and pride, he'd forgotten what hunger looked like. That night, Richard had just left a private charity gala, a fundraiser that, ironically, promised to feed the poor. He stepped into his Bentley, loosened his tie, and told his driver to take the long way home. He liked watching the city lights. They reminded him of how far he'd come. But when the car slowed at a red light outside that small bakery, he noticed her. A little girl sitting on the cold pavement, clutching a worn-out teddy bear, staring through the glass at cakes she could never afford. The driver frowned. "Should I move, sir?" Richard hesitated. Something about that child's eyes stopped him. He watched as she got up, brushed the dirt from her hands, and walked timidly to the bakery door. The cashier barely looked at her when she asked, voice trembling, "Do you have any expired cake?" The woman behind the counter shook her head coldly and told her to leave. Richard felt a strange sting in his chest. He didn't know why. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was memory. Or maybe it was the first time in years he'd actually seen someone who didn't exist in his world. He stepped out of the car, and in that moment, his life began to change. Richard walked slowly toward the bakery, rain starting to fall in soft silver threads. The girl had already turned away, her small shoulders trembling as she tried to hide her tears. He called out softly, "Hey, little one." She froze, not out of fear but surprise. No one had spoken to her gently in a long time. When she turned, her eyes, big, brown, and filled with something deeper than sadness, met his. Richard knelt so he could see her face. "Did you eat anything today?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "Just water from the park fountain." Her voice cracked like glass, but she still tried to smile, that kind of brave, innocent smile only kids who've seen too much still manage to wear. Richard glanced back at the bakery. Inside, people sipped lattes and laughed under warm lights. Outside, this child stood shivering, barefoot, forgotten. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you something warm." At first, she didn't move. Her eyes darted to the luxury car parked by the curb. "You don't have to, sir. I just asked for old cake. I'm not begging." Her words pierced him like a blade of truth, dignity still shining through her hunger. Inside the bakery, everyone stared when Richard walked in, soaking wet, holding the hand of a tiny homeless girl. He looked at the same cashier who had turned her away moments ago. "Give her whatever she wants," Richard said, "and make it fresh." The woman blinked, then nodded nervously. The girl whispered, "Just a small one, please." "For my mom, too. She's waiting in the alley." Richard's heart twisted. He ordered 2 full boxes instead. Hot chocolate, pastries, a warm sandwich. When they stepped outside again, the rain had turned heavier, washing the city in silver light. They walked toward the alley, and that's when he saw her, the girl's mother, sitting by a dumpster, weak and pale. Her skin was thin, her clothes torn, but when she saw her daughter holding food, her tired eyes filled with tears. Richard stood silent for a moment, the sound of rain echoing in his chest. He didn't know what to say. The little girl turned to him and smiled. "Thank you, sir. You're like an angel." He laughed softly. "I'm no angel, sweetheart." But something inside him broke open, the wall he'd built between himself and the world he left behind. He reached for his wallet, intending to give her money. But then he stopped. Money wouldn't fix this. Food would only last a night. What they needed was dignity, opportunity, a chance. So he knelt down again, his voice calm but heavy with emotion. "What's your name?" "Lila," she said proudly. "And that's my mom, Grace." Richard nodded. "Lila, how would you like to help me tomorrow? My restaurant needs someone special, someone brave." Her eyes lit up, confused but excited. "You mean me?" He smiled. "Yes, you." As they walked back toward his car, the rain eased, and for the first time that night, Richard Hale didn't feel like a billionaire. He felt human. What he didn't know was that Lila's simple question about expired cake would expose a truth about his own past he had long buried. The next morning, the city was alive with sunshine, but Richard didn't feel light. He couldn't shake the image of that child. The way her voice cracked when she said, "I'm not begging." He had everything. Penthouses, sports cars, his name etched on skyscrapers. Yet that little girl's strength had humbled him more than any business rival ever could. He drove to the bakery again. This time, he brought them both. Lila wore one of his daughter's old coats. Too big for her. Sleeves rolled up, but her smile made it beautiful. Grace, her mother, walked slowly beside her, eyes full of gratitude but still clouded by shame. When they entered the restaurant, Richard told his staff, "Meet your new helper." Everyone froze. They weren't used to seeing the boss bring in someone like her. Lila climbed onto a chair, clutching a napkin like it was treasure. She looked around, wide-eyed at the chandeliers and polished marble floors. "Can I really work here?" she asked. Richard nodded. "You already are." He gave her a small apron and showed her how to carry plates, how to greet customers, how to smile with confidence. For the first time, Lila felt seen, not as a homeless child, but as someone capable. But soon, whispers began. One manager leaned toward another. "Why is she here?" he muttered. "She doesn't belong." Richard heard every word. At that moment, something inside him burned. He turned sharply. "You know what doesn't belong here?" he said quietly. "Judgment, cruelty, looking down on people because you think you're above them." The room fell silent. Later that afternoon, as Lila swept the floor, Richard sat with Grace in the corner booth. Her hands shook as she held the cup of coffee he'd given her. "Mr. Hale," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." He looked up. She reached into her bag and pulled out an old photo, torn at the edges, faded from years of wear. It showed a young woman holding a baby in front of a small-town diner. "That's me," Grace whispered. "And the man who helped me once was your father." Richard froze. The room seemed to tilt for a moment. My father?" he whispered. Grace nodded. "He used to come by every Sunday. Always tipped fair. When I was pregnant, he gave me money to help with the hospital bills. He told me to never lose hope, that people still cared." Richard felt his chest tighten. His father had passed years ago, a man known for his kindness, for giving second chances. And now, here he was, unknowingly returning the same grace to the woman his father once helped. He stared at the photo again. The woman's smile, the man's familiar hand on her shoulder, it was fate, circling back in ways he never could have imagined. Tears welled in his eyes. He whispered, "He would have been proud of you. Both of you." Lila came running over, giggling. "Mr. Hale, look, I cleaned all the tables." Her energy shattered the heaviness in the air. He smiled through the tears. "You did amazing, sweetheart." That night, Richard closed the restaurant early. He drove Lila and Grace to a small, cozy apartment, one of his company's rentals, now theirs. No cameras, no headlines, no PR, just kindness. The kind that doesn't need to be seen to be real. And as he handed Lila the keys, she looked up and whispered, "Does this mean I don't have to ask for old cake anymore?" He smiled, voice breaking softly. "No, Lila, you'll never have to ask again." Weeks passed. The city moved on, as it always does. But for Richard Hale, life didn't go back to normal, because normal was exactly what kept him blind. Normal was eating in fancy restaurants while children starved on street corners. Normal was thinking charity was enough, that writing a check replaced seeing people. Now he couldn't unsee. Every time he drove through downtown, he noticed the faces he used to ignore. The man holding a cardboard sign in the rain, the mother sleeping under the bridge, the kid trying to sell candy just to eat that night. He started to stop, to listen, to talk. Meanwhile, Grace and Lila were thriving. Grace worked at the restaurant as a baker. Her hands steady, her spirit strong again. Her cinnamon rolls became famous among customers. People started coming not just for the food, but for the warmth. And Lila, she became everyone's sunshine. She'd greet guests at the door with her bright little smile, her hair tied with a red ribbon Richard's late wife once wore. She'd say, "Welcome to Hale's, where kindness is always on the menu." It wasn't just a slogan. It became the heart of the place. One night, the restaurant hosted a charity gala. This time, not for publicity or profit. The theme, feeding hope. Richard stood on stage looking out over the crowd. Hundreds of people, rich, poor, black, white, every background imaginable, sat together, eating side by side. No velvet ropes, no VIP tables. He began to speak. "I used to think success was about building something that touched the sky," he said softly. "But one day, a little girl asked me for expired cake, and that moment brought me back down to earth." Lila, sitting in the front row with Grace, smiled proudly. Richard continued. "She didn't need my pity. She needed someone to see her, to treat her like she mattered. Because she does. We all do." His voice cracked slightly. He paused, scanning the faces in front of him. In a world obsessed with what's new, shiny, and rich, don't forget the ones who are unseen, because real wealth is found in compassion. The audience was silent, not the cold silence of boredom, but the heavy, sacred silence that happens when truth hits home. When the event ended, Grace approached him, tears in her eyes. "You didn't just change our lives," she said quietly. "You reminded people what humanity looks like." He smiled. "No, Grace, you did." Outside, the night air was cool. Lila tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Hale," she said, holding something behind her back. He crouched down. "What's that, sweetheart?" She handed him a small box, wrapped clumsily in napkin paper, tied with red string. Inside was a slice of chocolate cake. "From me," she whispered. "So you never forget to be sweet." Richard laughed softly, holding back tears. In that moment, he realized, life isn't measured by what we keep, but by what we give. The next day, a new sign went up at the restaurant's entrance. It read, "No one leaves here hungry, not in stomach, not in heart." People stopped to take pictures, share stories, cry quietly at their tables, because it wasn't about food anymore. It was about faith. Faith that love could still exist in a world that often forgets how to care. And as Lila ran across the dining floor, her laughter echoing through the air, Richard looked up, as if speaking to his late father, and whispered, "Your kindness didn't die with you. It just took a while to find its way back."